The world held its breath, and at last, they spoke. After years of speculation, distance, and whispers that never seemed to fade, Yoona and Lee Chemin finally broke their silence. Under the soft lights of a Seoul studio, two voices long shrouded in rumor found the courage to speak. What they revealed wasn't a scandal, it was a confession. Quiet yet powerful. The kind that stuns not because it's loud, but because it's true. For years, they were two shadows orbiting the same light. The industry remembered them not just as co-stars, but as something more, something left unsaid. Suspended between admiration and ache. Their eyes had met too often on screen. Their chemistry too effortless to be coincidence. And then, without warning, the silence came. It lasted 4 years. No statements, no explanations, just a void filled with speculation, blurred photographs, and whispers that refused to die. Whenever their names appeared together, it was as if the world inhaled but never exhaled. Until this morning. The air in Seoul was unusually still. The kind of hush that hangs before rain. A cold breeze moved through the streets around the Aria Art Hall, where reporters, fans, and strangers with phones gathered under gray skies. Official announcement had been brief, joint appearance by Yoona and Lee Chemin at 10 a.m. But it was enough to shake the city awake. By the time the doors opened, out pulsed with nervous expectation. Inside, the hall was dressed in restrained, white walls, soft lights. A single table set with 2 microphones. It felt less like a press event and more like a confession waiting to happen. Cameras lined the aisles like sentinels. And then, at precisely 10, they entered. Yoona walked first, elegant as always, yet different. Gone was the effortless glamour she wore like armor. She was dressed simply. Cream blouse and pale trousers. Her hair tied loosely behind her. There was something vulnerable about her stillness. Behind her, Lee Chemin followed, taller than she remembered, perhaps. Or maybe just steadier. His black suit was immaculate. But his eyes gave him away. They carried the weight of sleepless nights and unfinished sentences. They took their seats side by side, their hands resting inches apart. The room froze. No greetings, no introductions. Just two people finally sharing the same space after years of pretending not to. Yoona was the first to speak. Her voice, soft, deliberate, unhurried, filled the room like the first notes of a forgotten song. "We didn't come here to explain the past," she said. "We came to speak about the silence." Moment, even the cameras seemed to hesitate before recording again. She looked down, gathering her words. The light caught the faint sheen of tears she refused to let fall. "Sometimes," she continued, "silence is not distance. It's survival." Lee Chemin watched her quietly. His jaw tightened. But not from anger, from restraint. He leaned toward the microphone. His voice low, steady. "We both thought silence would protect what we had," he said. "But it only buried us deeper." Crowd shifted. Reporters glanced at one another, unsure whether to type or listen. He went on. "There were rumors, stories, guesses. We let them grow because we were afraid the truth would hurt more. But the truth is simple. We were never enemies. We were never strangers. We were just scared." His words hung between them like fragile glass. Yoona nodded slowly. Her hand, almost unconsciously, closer to his on the table. Not touching, just close enough to bridge the distance the years had built. "Thought that if we disappeared from each other's stories," she said, "the world would stop watching. But it didn't. It kept watching. Even when there was nothing left to see." The confession wasn't theatrical. It wasn't rehearsed. It felt like something born of exhaustion. Two people too tired to pretend that indifference could keep them safe. They spoke for nearly 40 minutes. Not about scandals or betrayals, but about loneliness, misunderstanding, and the price of fame. Yoona admitted how she had learned to smile through the questions. How every interview that mentioned his name felt like being cut with invisible blades. "People think time heals," she said. "But silence doesn't heal. It only hides the wound." Lee Chemin listened. His eyes fixed on her the way you look at someone you once loved and maybe still do, cautiously, tenderly, afraid that a single word might wake old ghosts. When he spoke again, his tone shifted, heavier, trembling slightly. "I owe her an apology," he said. "Not for leaving, for not speaking when I should have. I let fear decide for me." The room gasped softly. Yoona turned her head. her expression unreadable. For years, the world had been waiting for a moment like this, and when it came, it was quieter than anyone imagined. We were young, she whispered. We didn't know how to exist without an audience. When everything you do is seen, you start to forget how to be real. He nodded, and a faint smile, sad, nostalgic, touched his lips. We lost the courage to be human, he said. Think we're finding it again today. Outside, rain began to fall. It wasn't heavy, just a slow drizzle that traced the windows and softened the city's noise. Inside, the sound of raindrops filled the spaces between their sentences. It made the hall feel smaller, more intimate. The world outside had dimmed to listen. For a moment, neither of them spoke. And in that pause, something invisible shifted, a kind of forgiveness that didn't need to be said aloud. Yuna took a breath, her voice trembling. Letters, she said. Unsent ones. Things I wanted to say but couldn't. I still have them. Chemin turned slightly, his expression breaking into something raw. I have them too, he said. A murmur swept the audience. It was the first time either of them had acknowledged that their silence hadn't been emptiness. Been full of words they were too afraid to share. Laughed softly, almost to herself. Maybe we should read them someday. He smiled. Maybe today is that day. The reporter from the Seoul Post leaned forward. Are you saying you were in love? The question cut through the air like thunder. Yuna didn't answer immediately. She looked at the floor, then at him. Then at the sea of flashing cameras. I'm saying, she said finally. Love never needed our permission. And with that, she closed her eyes briefly, a small, deliberate surrender. Lee Chemin reached for her hand. This time, he didn't stop halfway. His fingers found hers on the table, and the hall erupted into gasps and applause. But the applause wasn't for a scandal. It was for something purer, two people reclaiming their story. He squeezed her hand once, then spoke. We're not here to fix the past, he said. We're here to stop running from it. Outside, the rain intensified. The glass fogged. Reporters scribbled furiously. Yet no one dared interrupt. He told the room how fame had turned them into symbols instead of souls. How every smile became a performance. Silence a headline. How, one night after an award ceremony years ago, they had promised each other a truth they couldn't keep, to protect their bond by hiding it. We thought we were guarding something precious, he said. Love dies when you hide it too long. Yuna listened, tears catching the corner of her lashes. We didn't fail, she said quietly. We just paused. The audience melted into stillness again. The next few minutes, the conversation became less about them and more about everyone. They spoke of fear, of how the spotlight both warms and blinds. They spoke of wanting to be known for who they are, not what they represent. Not perfect, Yuna said, but we're real. And maybe that's enough. When the conference ended, they didn't rush to leave. They stood together, bowing slowly. Flashbulbs erupted like a storm of tiny suns. But neither flinched. For once, they seemed immune to the noise. As they walked out, hand in hand, the doors closed behind them with a soft click that felt like the closing of a chapter, or perhaps the opening of a new one. Outside, beneath the drizzle, of fans waited. Some held umbrellas, some held signs. When they saw the two appear together, the crowd fell silent. Then, slowly, applause began, scattered at first, then swelling, echoing against the wet streets of Seoul. Anna looked up at the gray sky. It's raining, she whispered. Chemin smiled. It's washing everything clean. Stepped forward, into the rain. Their shoulders brushing. Their steps perfectly in rhythm. Clicked behind them, recording what words could no longer capture. The headlines would later call it the morning of truth. Those who were there would remember something quieter, the sound of two hearts learning to speak again after years of silence. As the car doors closed and they drove away, the world outside erupted into noise, hashtags, live feeds, breaking banners. Inside that car, there was only stillness. Their hands remained entwined. Their reflections moving together in the window glass, blurred by rain. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Silence between them, for the first time in years, was finally peaceful. The sun returned to Seoul the next day, bright and unmerciful, determined to reveal what the rain had washed away. Newspapers fluttered on cafe tables, Televisions looped the footage of the press conference on every channel. Their voices echoed across the city, replayed. Translated. Softened by headlines that couldn't quite capture the tremor behind the words. Yet, for Yuna and Lee Chae-min, the world had gone strangely quiet. Had woken early. Long before their names appeared again on trending lists. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and wet air. She stood by the window, barefoot. The city stretched itself awake. Behind her, he was still half asleep. The sunlight cutting through the blinds and landing across his shoulders. Do you regret it? She asked softly. Not turning around. He blinked, then smiled faintly. No, he said. I regret the years we didn't say it sooner. Sighed. A car honked. The world reminding them that life continued, that confession was not an ending but an entrance into something new. By afternoon, the reactions had divided into tides. Some were shocked, others relieved. The words finally honest trended alongside too late. Fans posted montages of their past dramas. Shunned with heartbreak and hope. One clip, their last on-screen moment together before the silence, gathered millions of views within hours. In it, they had stood in a fake rainstorm, staring at each other as if the sky itself had stopped. Now, years later, reality had imitated fiction, only this time, the rain was real. Inside the apartment, they read the news in silence. Her phone buzzed endlessly, calls from friends, directors, endorsements. The machinery of fame creaking back to life. But she put it down. They'll spin this however they want, she murmured. Let them, he said. We've already said what matters. He reached for her hand across the table, the same gesture that had silenced 1,000 rumors the day before. Their fingers fit together naturally, like punctuation after a long sentence. That evening, they went for a walk near the Han River. Sunset stretched long and low, a wash of orange and violet over the water. People recognized him, but no one approached. For once, they were left alone, a rare kindness in a city that never stops watching. I used to dream about this, As said quietly. Just walking without pretending. He smiled. You always looked calm when you pretended. That's the point, she replied, laughing softly. Acting was easier than being honest. They stopped by the railing. The river glimmering beneath them. The sound of laughter from nearby couples mixed with the hum of distant traffic. Do you think they'll forgive us? She asked. He looked at her, eyes steady. Forgiveness isn't ours to ask for. We didn't hurt them. We just learned to tell the truth. She nodded, letting his words settle. The sky deepened into twilight. The first stars trembling awake above them. Over the next few days, their lives became a rhythm of contrasts, public frenzy and private peace. Agencies drafted statements, stylists prepared for photo shoots, producers whispered about reunion projects. Everyone wanted a piece of the story they had reclaimed. Two of them stayed quiet. They appeared once more, together, not on stage, not for cameras. A small charity concert supporting youth mental health. They sat in the back row, unnoticed at first, heads closed, sharing quiet smiles as the music rose. When a reporter eventually spotted them, the article that followed carried a simple headline. After speaking their truth, Yuna and Lee Chae-min choose silence again, but this time, it's peaceful. One night, weeks later, themselves on the same rooftop where they had once promised to protect each other through distance. The city glowed beneath them, alive with millions of windows, each one a fragment of another story. I used to think love had to be dramatic, Yuna said. That it had to fight for attention. He looked at her, his expression soft. And now I think love is quieter than we imagined, she whispered. But it lasts longer that way. Wind picked up, carrying her words into the night. He smiled, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that spoke more than any vow. You know, he said, we've spent years apologizing to the wrong people. Maybe it's time we forgive ourselves. He nodded, eyes bright. Then let's start now. They stood there, side by side, watching the lights move along the river like slow, golden confessions. Days passed. Then months. The noise faded. Their names no longer dominated the headlines, replaced by new faces, new stories, new silences waiting to be broken. But somewhere, the image of that morning remained, two people sitting side by side, finally saying what the world had forced them to swallow for too long. For their fans, it became a symbol, not of scandal, but of honesty. For themselves, it became freedom. Elected. They still walked red carpets and smiled for cameras. But the smiles were different now, unforced, unafraid. When asked about each other in interviews, they didn't dodge. "She's someone who understands me," he said once. "He's someone I'll always respect," she replied later. And that was enough. Time, their stories stopped being a story. Came something quieter. Something personal, a memory shared between two hearts that had already learned what silence costs and what truth saves. Years later, during an anniversary event, a journalist asked Yoona what she remembered most from that day in Seoul. She paused for a long time before answering. "Remember how heavy it felt to breathe," she said softly. "How light it felt when we finally did." She smiled then, the kind of smile that carries peace instead of pain. Lee Chae-min, interviewed separately. Almost the same thing. "We thought we were ending something that day. But we were really beginning again, as ourselves." Their answers, when placed side by side in print, read like two halves of one truth, still connected. Still moving in rhythm. Even after all the noise had died away. Words finally return after years of silence. Arrive with weight, not to destroy, but to heal. Yoona and Lee Chae-min's confession wasn't a scandal, it was a quiet act of courage. A reminder that love, friendship, forgiveness can outlast the spotlight. That truth whispered softly can echo louder than lies shouted in fame. To those who watched, cried, simply listened, thank you. Thank you for allowing two human hearts to be more than characters on a screen. Thank you for choosing empathy over judgment, patience over rumor. And to everyone who carries their own silence, may this story remind you, when you finally speak, the world may tremble, but it will also listen. End of article.